On the 22nd of May, 1915, near the small signal box at Quintinshill in Scotland, a series of mistakes led to the deadliest rail crash in British history. Involving multiple trains, a devastating fire, and soldiers on their way to the First World War, the disaster left over 220 people dead and hundreds more injured. What began as a routine morning on the railway became a national tragedy. Quintinshill was a passing loop on the Caledonian Railway, just north of the Scottish town of Gretna Green. It consisted of two main lines and two loop lines, controlled by a single signal box. Though not especially busy, Quintinshill was strategically important. Both passenger and troop trains used the route, and in 1915, with the First World War in full swing, military traffic on Britain's railways had dramatically increased. Trains carrying troops, equipment, and supplies moved constantly across the country in order to support the overwhelming war effort. On the morning of May 22nd, two signalmen, George Meakin and James Tinsley, were on duty. It was standard practice for one to cover the other's shift occasionally, and they had developed a habit of writing train movements in a scrap note rather than the official logbook, which was filled in later to avoid discrepancies if they were late. This seemingly small shortcut would prove disastrous. At around 6:30 a.m., the signalman allowed a local passenger train from Carlisle to Bedock to stop on the down main line at Quintinshill Station. This was not unusual, but it meant the line was temporarily blocked. Moments later, they received word of an upcoming troop train traveling south, carrying soldiers of the Royal Scots Regiment on their way to embark for the Western Front. The troop train, consisting of wooden carriages lit by gas lamps, was heavily loaded with hundreds of men. But in their confusion, and distracted by the presence of other trains waiting in the loop lines, the signalman forgot that the local passenger train was still occupying the main track. They cleared the line for the troop train regardless. At 6:49 a.m., the southbound troop train plowed head-on into the stationary local train. The collision was devastating, instantly crushing several carriages and killing many passengers and soldiers. But the worst was still to come. Only a minute later, the northbound express from Carlisle to Glasgow entered the station at full speed. With no warning and unable to stop, it smashed into the wreckage strewn across the lime. The impact caused carriages to topple, pile up, and ignite. The gas lamps in the wooden coaches burst, fueling a massive inferno. Flames spread rapidly through the wreckage, trapping passengers and soldiers alike. Eyewitnesses later described hearing desperate cries from inside burning carriages, but the intensity of the fire made rescue impossible. Within minutes, the sight was an apocalyptic scene. Twisted metal, shattered timber, and thick smoke billowing into the sky. The three-train collision had become a firestorm. The toll was catastrophic. At least 226 people were killed, though some estimates placed the number higher. More than 240 others were injured, many with severe burns. The majority of the victims were soldiers of the Royal Scots, making the disaster not just a civilian tragedy, but also a military one. The regiment was virtually decimated before even reaching the battlefields of France. The bodies of many victims were burned beyond recognition, and mass funerals were held in Scotland, attended by grieving families and military officials. The shock reverberated across the country, already reeling from wartime losses. An official inquiry found that the disaster had been caused by the negligence of the two signalmen, who failed to keep proper records and allowed conflicting movements on the line. Both were later tried and convicted of culpable homicide. They served terms of imprisonment before being released, but their reputations and careers were ruined. The Quintinshill rail disaster remains Britain's deadliest railway accident, its scale unmatched before or since. It exposed serious flaws in railway working practices, particularly the dangers of informal shortcuts and over-reliance on memory. As a result, stricter rules were introduced for signal box procedures, record keeping, and the handling of train movements. The disaster also underscored the vulnerability of wooden, gas-lit carriages, which were gradually phased out in favor of safer designs. Today, a memorial stands at Rosebank Cemetery in Edinburgh, where many of the soldiers of the Royal Scots are buried. The Quintinshill rail disaster is remembered not only as a railway tragedy, but also as part of the wider losses suffered during the First World War.